This is the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast, where we share the stories of locals across the country who took that empty lot or that old building and turned it into something awesome that their community needs. I'm Christy Candle, and I've been a real estate developer my entire career. My co-host Raphael is a commercial broker, and together we're sharing the stories of locals making a huge impact on their communities. And what we've learned is you don't need millions in the bank or decades of experience to get started. You just need the confidence, tools, and the right people around you. This podcast is your chance to gain the confidence to get in the game, because real estate development isn't just for the insiders anymore. It's for people like you too.
Welcome to the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Rafael Collazo. I am a commercial broker, investor, and developer located here in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm excited to be here, as always, with my co-host, Christy Candle, real estate developer extraordinaire. Always great to see you.
Hey, great to see you. Yep, I'm a real estate developer, investor, and I teach locals how to become developers in their community. And today we're actually talking to someone who lives and works in one of the communities I first moved to when I moved to Florida back in the early 2000s. And I found her, though, actually, after we presented one of our development projects at 1 Million Cups, which is kind of a Shark Tank type deal that St. Pete puts on. And everyone said, you need to talk to Nicole. She's doing some awesome things in the community with St. Pete, with women, with everything. She's like, you got to talk to her. So was able to reach out and have a conversation. I was like, yep, you are an awesome person, an awesome resource and mover and shaker in St. Pete. So we wanted to have you on the pod. So Nicole Waters, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here. It's really wonderful to hear how many different things are going on around us at any given time. And so it was also a pleasure to meet you. And I learned so much in that brief conversation that we had. And I look forward to continuing these conversations.
Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure. I'm kind of curious. Usually when we get started with these podcasts, is we like to learn a little bit more about the individuals. So if you don't mind kind of sharing a little bit about your backstory and really, your what got you into what you're doing today in St. Pete.
Yeah, so I'll start with a couple titles that I carry with me each day. And the first is Executive Director of the Edge District. The Edge District is a small business district in St. Pete. It's in the thoroughfare of Central between 9th Street and 16th and 1st Ave North and 1st Ave South. We're one of 4 main streets in the St. Pete community and one of 12 different districts that we have. So one of many in this ecosystem, and we'll dive a little deeper into it, but we have about $500 million worth of development slated for our area. So taking on this new role as executive director this past year has been a great learning experience, but something I've been really passionate about. I'm also the founder of Amplify Women Tampa Bay. And we're a community where title is second and the person is first, because we understand the power of women in, again, ecosystems or communities, and how when they are working from different facets, how powerful that they can be in stretching the dollar, making sure we have healthy communities, and really being innovative in solutions that we bring to our communities. So those two work really, really nicely together. But my backstory is that I was able to earn this role of executive director for the Edge District because of my experience in Miami. So I moved from Cleveland, Ohio to Miami in the mid-90s. And there was this wonderful event that came to Miami called Art Basel, which literally changed the landscape of every community in the area. So from Miami Beach to downtown to now known as Wynwood. And I lived and served on the executive committee in Coral Gables on the Chamber of Commerce. And we did a lot of development and improvement there as well. So when I was in Miami, I was in positions of team and influence with development, but I was not necessarily as aware and engaged as I am now here in St. Petersburg. And now that I'm in this role, everything I learned from my experience and my leadership in Miami, I've been able to pull forward and be in St. Pete at around the same time of that booming development as I was in Miami. And so it's come together really nicely, and I'm really excited to serve.
It's amazing. So what brought you from Miami to St. Pete? Was it this particular opportunity? Because it seems like you're pretty established in the Miami market. It's kind of interesting that you took the leap to St. Pete.
Yeah, I had been coming back and forth since 2011 to St. Pete. And in I would say 2017, the quality of life living in Miami became really difficult. We were living in Coral Gables and all of our friends were in downtown or Miami Beach. So just getting across town became very difficult. Things were very expensive, no such thing as parking. And an opportunity came up where we had been coming back and forth to St. Pete since 2011, and we were looking to get out of Miami. And so when we looked at St. Pete, it was like, well, you've got a great airport, professional sports teams, a thriving community, the arts and culture, access to water. It like literally checked off everything. So Miami is amazing. I still go back and forth, but for St. Pete, it was just the right time and the right place. And it was a personal choice for quality of life.
Yeah, I can attest to that of having lived there and then spent a ton of time in Miami. It's just they're both great places. And the cool part about St. Pete though is like you said, it's like when it was the St. Pete that was there when I left for California for my opportunity to go open an office out there, it is not what it is today. And every time I would come back and visit friends, I'm like, they got it. This community is coming together. They have the vision. If St. Pete were what it is today, back when I lived there, I would have never left. So it's, to me, it's also very exciting to get in on the early stages and you see, okay, I see that all the powers that be are pushing things in the right direction, that we're making this change and I get to be part of it. Like that's so cool.
It's really interesting and a delicate time in St. Pete. And I say this because we have experienced the charm of St. Pete and the quietness and all the things that make it awesome. Mom and pop shops, craftsman homes, the water, but the direction that St. Pete is going in, while it will still always have the reflection of these things, it is also moving in a new direction, both of experience and imagery and quality of life. And that is really interesting because I think it's important to be intentional about how we're experiencing St. Pete today and how we've experienced it in the past while not allowing it to prevent us from moving forward.
That's a very true point. You're at the pain point in the inflection where you've got the people who have lived there and always known it as how it used to be. I mean, I come back and there's skyscrapers there, there's towers, there's things that were not there before that now make this a city. And I know some community members who are like, what the hell is happening? We're losing our city. We're losing our community. And that's where, like you said, being intentional about development and having it happen with and for the community instead of to the community is so important. And unfortunately, a lot of times developers do get a bad rap because we come in and we bulldoze and we put in what we want and we make our return and we get out. And that doesn't necessarily help the community. So having leaders like you who can help guide and shape the vision and bring the right things in, knowing we're never going to please everyone, we're never going to satisfy everyone, but we can be intentional and help show them that this can all work if we work together in the right way, which we're dealing with the same thing down in Southwest Florida. We've got several older communities that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to look completely different. And it's that same thing of reaching out to the neighborhood groups and getting the community members on board and having, we've got to do this collaboratively and intentionally. So this is, you guys are a great case study because we're probably 10, 15 years behind you down in Southwest Florida.
I think I have identified one of the opportunities, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to acknowledge this opportunity, but I went to an event over in Tampa that was launching or introducing a development that's happening here in St. Pete. And this was like an over-the-top event. And there was a handful of people from St. Pete that were there. And they were like, oh, I can't believe, all these people from other cities. And, I think there was this kind of like us and them mentality. And there was
Yeah.
not a whole lot of interest in entertaining this new project and or these new people that would be coming to our community. And I think the real opportunity is these developments are going to happen, but they don't have to happen in a silo. And the developers could do a better job, and the people who are investing in these projects could do a better job of looking beyond the project. However, this is a two-way partnership that has to happen. The existing leadership, the existing residents, the existing decision makers also need to say, how do we make this project and this investment in a property beyond the project, right? How do we get these residents and these developers engaged in the community, like actually sticky and engaged, like in the arts and in leadership? And I think that when new projects come on board like this and new residents or new investors are being, oh God, like, honeymooned into their decision, they should
Right.
also be talked about. It shouldn't be like, hey, look at this building. We want you to invest in it. It should say, look at this building in St. Pete, and you will be entering this ecosystem of
Yeah.
arts and culture and professional sports teams. And where do you want to get plugged in beyond your investing in this unit? That's what I don't know who would be responsible for that unless all of us are responsible, but we could do a better job there.
Yeah. Bridging the gap between, because we talk about this on our podcast a lot, where you have investors that come from out of the community that obviously have no ties to it. They don't really understand the dynamics within it. And not to say that, everything that community members say is gospel. I mean, of course, there's going to be expansion, there's going to be progress in some way, but you want to be deliberate about the way that you approach a project. And that's why we always encourage local people in their communities to take on these projects, because they're the ones who are in the fabric of what's going on within the community. So they're able to, be deliberate about the way they bring development to the community. And I think in your case, when you're talking about St. Pete, it's a little bit different than what we see here in Louisville. I mean, a lot of the people who operate are somewhat local or regional, versus in Florida, at least it seems like there's a lot more out of state and out of city people that are coming in to be able to be able to deliver some product to the market. But I'm curious about your role at Edge and kind of that dynamic that you're sharing, because I'm sure with being in that position, you are face to face with, number one, obviously the community that you're serving within that area, but then you have all these different pieces, which are the developers that are coming in to be able to deliver to some form of project in that little area, and then also you're dealing with the public side, right? You're dealing with different leadership of that city councilors, city planners, and all these other pieces together. So how do you manage that, and how are you able to make sure that you're delivering the vision that ultimately you're trying to achieve with what you have going on at Edge?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic to be in this role because I don't work for the city. I
Hmm.
work for our business members. So we are an association, and our business members pay a membership essentially to access the services of the executive director being the liaison with the city. So if they have a sanitation issue or whatever the case might be, instead of them calling the city, they've got somebody like me to help them with that. But you're right. I absolutely also represent our board of directors and act as liaison to several of our developers. And we've done a great job in the last 12 years in our existence of getting a really strong reputation with the developers and saying, listen, we're not against development, but we want to help guide you in making meaningful decisions where we show you our master plan and you make decisions that complement this master plan and don't miss opportunities to maximize retail space or green space. I will admit, though, it's interesting with developers because when they come to us and they say, we would love your support, and this is, our plan, and then that plan comes to fruition, and then all of a sudden, well, those concessions that we made in our community, then they're not always considered when they ask for variance changes or when they decide that the plan was not executed as it was presented. They, had to go in a different direction for various reasons. And so, we're managing that relationship from the request from support all the way through through execution, and balancing the trust factor is the biggest thing. We don't want to not be in favor of your project, but we also want to trust that if you're asking us to make a sacrifice in our community so that you can move forward with your building, that when you're done with that project, that we're level setting those agreements. And that's tough. That is really, really tough, but it is part of the job.
I'm curious from like an actual being able to put that in. Do your comments and feedback get put in as part of the conditions of approval for a project?
Yes.
Which then in theory could tie and hold their feet to the fire to say, hey, you need to do this, or you can't get your certificate of occupancy, or is there a enforcement, or where's the breakdown potentially?
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point. Yes, the DRC records all of our meetings, and we give them letters that everything is in writing, but that's the big crux. Was everything put in writing? Was everything made crystal clear? And that's where everyone just needs to do better.
Yeah. Making sure it gets in the staff report, the conditions of approval, reviewing the draft conditions before it goes to any hearings or getting in and then figuring out an enforcement body. Yeah, I've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of conditions of approval and gone through them to the detail, and it's like, no, and we make sure, like personally for our developments, we make sure that those make it into the plan set to where every page of the conditions of approval are there, and that they separately as a package get into the GC bid set to be like, you are building this. And it's never like completely foolproof, but then at the same time for us it was, hey, if we miss something, we're going to go make it happen. But
That's the second piece is where I'm sure there's some disconnect with some developers. I'm sure there are some like you that are very deliberate about it, but then there's others that if there's a way that they can circumvent certain things, then I'm sure they're going to try to do so.
Well, and these projects take multiple years,
Right.
and
Yeah,
then there's
sure.
change in leadership. Well, so and so said that we could do that. You didn't put it in writing. Now so and so is not there, and it doesn't get done, and things change. And so that's why it is really important. And we've learned, and this is the biggest opportunity that I can say we have as a community, and we can learn from each other, district to district, is this is very new. This is not standard protocol in St. Pete. This is a new experience. You don't know what you don't know until you know it, and then you have to just learn on every project. So, but back to Raphael, your question, at any given time, you have to think about who are your stakeholders? Are you representing the small businesses who need to be heard and make sure that their environments are protected? Are we working with the developers who need to move their projects forward? Also the city, are we working closely enough with the city to make sure that we are advocating an extension of their economic development departments? And so it's a delicate balance, but I think that St. Pete's a unique place, and the fact that everyone tries their best to work collaboratively. It doesn't always work out that way, but I really genuinely think that in St. Pete, in a way that I did not see in Miami, people are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I mean, and I think too, obviously with Miami being such a big city and having so much outside interest, I mean, I think it seems like a St. Pete is one of those communities where you have a very tight knit, feel, vibe, and just the way that people interact is going to be different than what you see in major metros. And I think what we try to do with this podcast and a lot of people that listen to the podcast is, inspire those in smaller communities to take on roles in their own community as developers, because a small project here or a small project there in a small community can make a huge impact. And then it creates this like flywheel effect where more and more people maybe get inspired to take on more projects in their area. And again, it just creates a unique opportunity for those in that area.
And to that point, I would say anyone who's listening to this podcast, get involved where you can. The cities they have free committees that you can join as a responsible resident, and you can just learn about what's going on. Here at the Edge District, we have an design and eco-vitality committee that our business members can join, where all of our developers also sit on those phone calls and we talk through the projects. So you don't have to be a developer or in the industry to actively participate or actively learn, and be in rooms and spaces where you can contribute. And honestly, that's how I got started. I sat on the executive committee for the Coral Gables Chamber of Commerce. We went through a beautification of Giralda, which was a major project, major streetscape, and we had to work with engineers and sanitation and sewage and utilities. And I learned so much from just that one project by being a part of my community, that now when I'm in a position like this, I'm better suited to be able to navigate those conversations. But it was just being in the room and learning through getting involved by sitting in committees.
Yeah, and we talk a lot on the private side of like how you can, you could work for a developer, you could work for an architect, an engineer, but also getting involved on the public side, where it doesn't necessarily mean running for office or being a planning commissioner, but doing things like this to where we think sometimes with politics and leadership that we can't make an impact and difference, but we actually truly can. When we take it hyper local to our city councils and our county commissioners, they're the ones shaping our communities, and we truly do have a voice and we can make an impact. We just have to choose to get involved and to see where are the communities, where are the groups that we might be interested in, and try it out. And you never know, because it is a amazing learning curve. I did a 2-year stint as a planning commissioner. Even I've presented to hundreds of planning commissions, but I was like, oh, I ran for county commissioner. The good guy won the primary, so I was just appointed to planning commission. I'm like, you can take that. I'm running many companies. But it was eye-opening just to see a little bit of the dysfunction, but also just to see how the public side also goes in everything that staff and council and everyone goes through. And it's like, we're all doing this because we care about the communities we live in. So whether you're doing it from the public side or you're doing it from the private, if we come together from that framework and we are collaborative, it can create some really cool stuff. But doesn't always work out that way, but good.
Yeah, the potential's there.
So what are some projects that you guys have worked on, either that are have and actually maybe if you could describe a little bit of the history of your edge district, and what it was and how it got to where it is now, and then maybe the future of where it's headed.
Sure. I'll make it brief because it's actually a very long history. The Edge District, which again is between 9th Street and 16th Street, First Ave North, First Ave South. This was the actual hub of where St. Pete started as a city. So there, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was actually a railroad line that ran right through Baum Avenue. It was called the Orange Line, and Jacob Baum was one of our earliest settlers, and they started to develop this area.
Hey, can we chat for a second? Since you're listening to this podcast, you're already thinking like a developer. You see the potential in your community, and you're ready to do more than just watch from the sidelines. That's exactly why we created the Local Developer Vault. It's a free resource full of tools, templates, and trainings to help you take action. And here's the best part. When you sign up, you'll also get access to our local real estate developer community. It's full of people just like you who are making real things happen in their neighborhoods. So don't just listen to the stories. Become the next one that we spotlight on our show. The link in the show notes to unlock the vault and join our movement.
So when I think about things that are innovative or we want to start, I love it when they start in the Edge District, really perpetuating that history. But Baum Ave was a major thoroughfare. Central Ave did not exist. And there was, over the early 1900s, you saw that Edge District was very automotive. We had a dealership, service shops, tire shops, very industrial in the Edge District. Then, there was the boom in the late 1920s. Things went, as dark, and Edge District just was not very desirable. And then, it got a little bit busier again, but it's ebbed and it's flowed, but it's always been the central hub. And so what is happening now, I would say in 2014, when we established the association, it was very intentional, and it was a reflection of what was happening at Tropicana Field. That changed everything. And then you started to see the association established, small businesses protected, but this was still not a place that many people would come to. A lot of crime. You just wouldn't come here. Then Green Bench opened, and you had Ferg's and Bottega. And little by little, you saw these businesses creep in, and Tropicana and the baseball team continued to evolve. And then we built a residential tower. It used to be called Fusion 1560. It was on 1560 Central Ave. And it really was intentionally built to see if people would tolerate moving just west out of downtown, and if the Edge District was a viable community. And that apartment complex did prove to show that the Edge District was viable for residents as well as business. And then you really started to see that everything churned since like 2011 and beyond. And now it's just, Ferg's is named first, the #1 sports bar in the United States. We've got
great.
the Central. It is great. Now we've got the Central coming with 100,000 square feet of Class A office, which is like the first time that we've had Class A office developed in St. Pete in a long time. You're going to have Jeffrey Zakarian, who has a restaurant in the Marriott Hotel in that same 2-acre property lot. So all of a sudden, all it takes is just a couple things to get that momentum going. So we're really excited about the development that's coming in the Edge District, but I do caution those who want to just assume that how the Edge District is today will look that way by 2030. It certainly will not.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, and to your point, like as you've started to accelerate with the advancement of all these different projects, trying to be deliberate about the way that you deliver future projects and making sure it is tied somewhat to the master plan so that it doesn't just become a hodgepodge of different projects that kind of stand siloed out. It becomes more infused into the fabric of the community. And regarding that evolution, I mean, I'm curious to know, because I do a lot of I'm a big into retail, so that's kind of my big thing in Louisville. Do a lot of restaurant, all different types of retail, and I'm kind of curious as to how that corridor has evolved from a retail standpoint, specifically in restaurants. I mean, how have you seen that kind of shift over the last decade?
So it's shifted a lot and it's going to continue to shift. I would say on the retail side, I would actually like to see more of a retail mix, or trying to get restaurants and bars in the Edge District is not a problem. We have Bottega and we have Hawkers and we have several other restaurants actually coming on board in the next year. We have an Argentinian restaurant coming in, seafood. We just had a little Italian shop open. But on the retail side, we would like to see more retailers, things that will really cater to all the residents that are moving in, so that they can do not just dining, but also shopping, galleries, things like that. So we're seeing some of our vacancies being filled by the end of the summer. A group, public knowledge, a group called 9010, they are also very heavy in the retail side, which we were really excited. They purchased some property on the 1100 block in the Edge, and they just are in the midst of purchasing some on the north side of the same block, which is nice because they are going to come in and build additional retail space to really close a gap that we have along on Central Ave. They're not interested in putting up a tower. We have plenty of developers that are going to be putting up towers, but they're coming in and really saying, let's look at the retail experience of our consumers, visitors, and these residents and make sure that we have a solid mix. And so that is really something exciting that we are going to see continue to evolve over the next 5-6 years. Now, my job, or what I'm personally invested in making sure happens, is that we continue to advocate for the local first class mom and pop retailers, while we also continue to consider bringing in national brands. We have Sweet Green here. We have Solid Core. Those are both franchises, and they're doing extremely well in the Edge District. They're doing really, really well for their brands. But I also want to make sure that Ash Couture and Matter of Fact and Kalamazoo Oil Company also continue to thrive. And so maintaining some sort of that balance, that's going to be the real task. And that's working with our landlords, working with our developers, making sure that the spaces are appropriate and the rent is manageable. And so I've got my work cut out for me.
One of the fascinating things about retail, to your point, it's like there's a very narrow window that you can operate in depending on the type of business that you operate. So there's some that are, higher end restaurants may have a higher threshold for rents versus, maybe a small mom and pop retailer that sells clothing. Their price point is going to be a lot different than what you could achieve at a hot fine dining establishment or a high volume, fast casual concept. And then the dynamic of, mixes of different uses, because restaurants can be very high traffic and high parking needs, and that creates its own set of problems. And and you want to make sure there's a mix of different retailers that can support the existing residential population and future residential population. So
Yeah.
it's fun. I love talking about retail.
Well, I'm going to have to continue to listen to this podcast because I'm sure you guys will give us some great tips to guide us through this decision making and guide us really through being a resource to all of our stakeholders, because it is a delicate time right now and I really want to make sure that we do it well.
Do you know if does the city or the EDC, are there any grants or things that can help? Because it always comes in development. It's like there's a gap in the financing. There's a gap in making the numbers work. Is there any help that the city has for small businesses, maybe for the retailers coming in or for the developers to help offset and get that rent gap a little bit closer?
That's a great question, and I do not know the answer to that quite yet. I will tell you that there is some funding for projects that we are doing to work on streetscape to help absorb some of the expense that would be incurred by our small businesses to make sure that we don't overextend them for projects that are happening. But as far as rent, the only effort that I've seen in the last month is the Chamber of Commerce has created space where they bring together the developers and individuals looking for retail space so they can talk about what the needs are and what they can afford, so that the landlords have a better sense of like what's reasonable and is there a phased approach that you can work with. But great question, and I'm interested in learning more about that. I don't have that answer.
And I think it's evolving in a lot of communities right now where they're starting to go, okay, we've talked a lot about housing and how there's a big gap, but it's also in our businesses and our spaces that we go to. So I think a lot of communities are starting to figure out, okay, how do we maybe come together and solve that? And there's not a blanket one. It's just figuring out what's all out there and what's even available and trying to figure out what that need is. Because if you can get those locals that are invested in the community running the stores and the shops, those could last so much longer than, say, a national tenant who changes their what they're doing and their approach to things. And I agree, you need both, but having those strong local tenants, but understanding all the barriers that it takes to even get them in and open.
Yeah, no, locally, I can only speak locally. We have a pretty good relationship with our local small business development center, and they do a really good job of providing base resources for people who are just getting started. We also have a large immigrant community, so we also have some services through different local organizations that provide them with resources to be able to just get started. And then obviously that's a grassroots effort as they continue to grow and expand, and different parts of town they start to filter into, and it creates an ecosystem. And obviously what you guys are doing is great on your end, and I think meeting in the middle with all these different other agencies and people is also very helpful as well. But one thing I'm curious about, and kind of pivoting a little bit to what you're doing with Amplify, because I think it's obviously great what you're doing to be able to support a wide base of people that, again, have a similar goal and similar mission. How did you decide to get into that? As we kind of mentioned offline, we're looking to do something similar, as far as not to the same type of structure or mission, but we're looking to do some programming related to the things that we are doing on this podcast. So I'm kind of curious if we can dive into your background with that, what inspired you to get involved, and then ultimately how you brought it to where it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. So my experience in the finance world and helped me realize the gap between small business owners and all of the resources that are available to them. Everything from things like SCORE, their local chambers, also other associations that are entrepreneurial resource organizations that have access to free resources, including funding, mentorship, and they were just missing each other. So I would be talking with business owners, opening up their business accounts, commending them on understanding how important it is to keep your business finances from your personal finances. And as we're in the conversation, they're telling me their pain points. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you not know about this opportunity or that opportunity? And so I would, on a one-to-one basis, be kind of providing that insight. When I left corporate, I thought, I just cannot know that this gap exists and do nothing about it. And so that really was the springboard by which we created Amplify Women Tampa Bay, because it was really like, this is going to be the springboard where we bridge this gap. And so the first year I had my summit, I brought all of those resources into a room, or as many of them as I could, along with small business owners, and we had great success in connecting those dots. And we did it again the second year. We took a little bit different of approach, and each year we're getting closer and closer to realizing that while these entrepreneurial groups are the resource, the connecting of the dots happens between trusted one-on-one relationships. And so over the years, Amplify Women Tampa Bay has actually morphed into understanding that if we build environments where women build relationships and trust, they will share their resources. And now those are the employee resource groups. And now those are their CPAs and their attorneys and their investors. And so it's been a process, but that's where it started. It started in saying, listen, the resources are there. We're just missing our target.
I love this. This also reminds me so much of Beth Azor and what she's doing in South Florida. She's a commercial broker, and just when she found out during COVID in 2020 that 3% of women invest in commercial real estate, yet we were in leading roles negotiating giant deals, but not being the investors getting the actual return. She's like, I need to fix that. And so she created a summit, and I think this year was number 6. But the same thing, there's a gap. There's an education component that goes, but it's the power of the relationships that are in the room that truly make it happen. It's hearing her story, hearing yours. I'm like, yes. And then Rachel up in Cincinnati, who's doing something similar. And it's just, we had her on the pod too. But it's awesome to see people going, hey, here's a problem. I've got the tools and resources. Let's build community and come together and let it evolve over time and see what kind of ripple effect and impact we can make.
Yeah. And Chrissy, one of the things I like that we were talking about before we got started, and Raphael, this was like another aha moment for me was, as an event planner or someone who holds space for those who are looking to serve, at first I had the tendency of like over programming the space, right? Oh, I got to make sure I got to bring in all these resources. I got to make sure everything is there. And over the years, I realized No, I need to bring in enough resources where conversations get started and it feels useful, but then I also need to build in the space where people have time to digest and talk about and think about what we just put in front of them in that space. Because otherwise, you overprogram, you give a lot of information, and then they go on with their day. And the effectiveness and the retention of what you just shared dwindles. And so the more you can do in enforcing retention and experience and connecting with that information in the moment, the better. And I'm really excited to test that theory even further this August at the summit.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, in for those of you guys who are listening, so we were talking a little bit offline regarding some of this stuff. Yeah, and so I think you're 100% right. I think we've all been in situations in the past where you're in an event or something, and they're just continually talking to you and talking to you and talking to you, and it's like, oh, there's a 5 minute break, and then you go get some coffee, you come back, and then you sit through another talk and talk and talk, and it could be a great event, it could be good conversation, good information that's shared. There's not that opportunity for you to kind of just intermingle and get to know those other people and really talk through how you could potentially implement some of the things that you've learned into what you're doing on a day to day. And that definitely was a light bulb moment from us, just saying, wow, like that's true. I mean, I think the best events I've been to are ones where you're allowed to kind of just explore with others around you, and those are where meaningful relationships are built. So yeah, that's very
Absolutely.
insightful that you share that. So one thing I'm curious about regarding, continuing your growth and Amplify, has it become predominantly the summit, or now are you also kind of expanding into other areas where you can offer different services to the people that ultimately are part of the community?
Yeah, so I'm intentionally not offering programming or going in that direction. I'm really focusing my energy primarily on the summit, but the community does want to connect throughout the year. And so we have created spaces and experiences. So they're not networkers, but they truly are experiences. So we've been able to partner with artists who have exhibits on display at the local museum, and they'll do a VIP tour of their exhibit to a small group. We've done chef's tastings and wine tasting. We just recently partnered with the Tampa Bay Sun. That's our female professional football team. And they were putting up their championship flag. And so that evening we went and enjoyed that with them. And so we'll also create experiences where people can just socialize. That's also where real relationships are built. And so we have worked in some of that so that when people get to the summit, they already know who they're in the room with. And when they're learning and guiding, there's things that we can independently apply to our businesses or our community, but there's also things that we can say, you know what, I think if we all work together, we could actually make this successful for St. Pete as a community as a whole. And so, but I intentionally haven't done any programming. However, I do amplify other people's programming. So if someone comes to me and says, hey, listen, I'm doing this workshop, or I'm, trying this new product or service, can I use your platform to amplify it? We love to use our platform to do that, but I can't do programming. It's too much.
There's a whole other, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that I think it's a constant battle, especially as driven people, as entrepreneurs, as leaders within a community. There's so many different shiny objects out there. So it's
And so many
important to
problems we want to solve and things we want to fix.
Exactly.
And
No, I
it's
get it.
like, oh, but I can help with that. Crap, but
Mhm.
it's going to take away from my core thing and I can't do that.
You know what keeps me balanced? It keeps me calibrated in this decision is every time I think like I should do that or I can fix that, or I stop and I think there is somebody way more qualified than me to be able to do that. How can I support them in getting it done? Or how can I offer some tools or resources that will propel them in doing the work? And that's kind of been something that I've learned in the last 3 years through having Amplify. Is like I've built a platform. I don't need to fix these things, but I can help other people move more quickly to the solution by helping them.
Being the connector and giving the yeah, but not being dependent on the outcome and making sure it follows through. Yeah. So one thing that comes up a lot in development and running Amplify and all of that is partnerships. And we were having a conversation the other day, just, there's this thing that, hey, partnerships are bad, stay away from them. They give you more gray hair and wrinkles. But clearly, if you can find the right collaborators and you can partner, you can go so much further, so much faster. So maybe what's your philosophy or thought process on that, and maybe a key partnership that has been like, yeah, that we were able to do some really cool stuff with that.
So, cautionary tale, the best thing that I do first is check my emotions. In partnerships, especially in the beginning, it's really easy to only see like, this would be amazing. This is going to be so great. Or why wouldn't I partner with this person? But I try to really check my emotions and then get logical and say, okay, well, why is this a good partnership? Is this a win-win? And what could be potentially some of the pitfalls, or how could this suck me of my time, talent, or treasure down the road? And that's the one thing I would share about partnerships, because I think especially when you are in a position where a partnership would be beneficial to you, you want it even more. And so you'll only look at through it from that lens. But partnerships are amazing. And one of the ones that I have started this year was a partnership with a marketing firm. And that gave me so much capacity back. One, that is not my forte, not where my strength lies. And I was spending so much time. So I did invest, and it has been able to give me a return twice over. So I would say find what is something that is genuinely a weakness or an opportunity for you, and then find the right partner by being smart and logically thinking through, why is this a good partnership? Could this be a long-term partnership? And is it a win-win where emotions are not in the driving seat?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I appreciate that thought process, being more logical about the way that you approach the partnership in any endeavor. Because think a lot of times you end up just partnering with people that you initially have good things in common with, or maybe your friends and everything else. But just because you're friends doesn't mean you necessarily need to be in partnership together, So it's definitely a thoughtful approach to the way you thought through it. And we had a gentleman on the podcast relatively recently that had something insightful to say that I thought I'd share, was that he viewed partnerships in two different buckets. One is project by project partnership, and then one is a long-term partner. So like if you're talking about owning a business together and you're going to be in business for 20 years, that decision-making process regarding that partner is going to be a lot different than maybe a project by project partnership. Because let's say it's just a project, well, maybe that filter is, okay, well, maybe this makes sense in the interim, and if for whatever reason that doesn't work out, you're not tied to this person for a long time. So I think the lens with which he approaches is like, yeah, we'll give it a shot. As long as they're in high integrity and we feel like there's some similarities or synergies there, he's willing to give it a shot on the project side. But as far as the long-term commitment from partnership, that takes a lot more deliberate thought process. And I found it interesting because I never really thought of it that way when it came to partnerships. And frankly, a lot of the partners that I've been involved in have been predominantly project by project. And it's worked well so far, but who knows if in the future there's partnership opportunities for long term. But I thought I'd share that.
Yeah, no, it's a great reminder. I like it.
Definitely. So where do you see the next 5 years evolving to with what you're doing with Edge and ultimately in Amplify? I'd be kind of curious to note that for the audience.
Yeah, for the Edge, it's, I always kid, I do monthly tours of the Edge District, and we talk about the history, the present, and the future. And I always kid with whoever's on the tour that particular month. I always say, I wish I could put virtual reality glasses on you all, and I wish you could see the Edge with the information that I have in regards to these developments. And we do have a great website here called St. Pete Rising. St. Pete Rising is a great resource that shows you all of the development projects that have proposed, that are in progress and have been completed. And it's fascinating, but it really does give you a nice visual of what is to come. And so for me, I'm constantly walking through the Edge, imagining these developments already in fruition. And I'm going to reflect back on something I said earlier. The delicate balance that I am holding true every single day is having this vision, being able to see what the district will look like at 2030, while also trying to figure out how do I keep the existing district vibe and personality and businesses presence up through that next stage of where we're going. The clientele's going to change, the restaurant's going to change, the investors are going to change. And so the Edge District right now is a very exciting time. It's also a very delicate time. And I tell people all the time, take lots of pictures, write down everything that you know, because it will definitely be an important part of our history in 5 years from now. I mean, literally, we're not talking 10. In 5 years, It's going to look very different. And then as far as Amplify, my goal is that I continue to grow a community of influential decision makers and women who are willing to be brave in identifying the barriers that we have collectively and then coming together with a solution or choosing to work with a local stakeholder who can execute solutions that will help us get beyond these barriers. And so I'm not just building a community, I'm trying to build a voice for Tampa Bay that will help us overcome barriers that we're experiencing.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, it's thoughtful approach to that vision. So that's very great.
Thank you.
I love it. I
Appreciate
love
you
it.
guys asking.
Is there any advice? So you wear all the hats. We like to give it, and you've already dropped tons of nuggets, but just advice to the people listening who are their local developers in their community, they're small business owners. So they have everything that we talked about is applicable. But what advice would you maybe leave them with?
I would leave them with keeping things in perspective and getting involved beyond your purview. I think sometimes we get too close to the things that we're most passionate about or that we're good at, and we forget to see the bigger impact and ripple effect that it has within our communities. And, sometimes we just take things too seriously. And again, our emotions get ahead of us, and then we're not able to be as impactful as we genuinely want to be. And life is short, nothing's that serious, and everything you're worried about will be there tomorrow. So do what you can and be able to look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, no,
Mic
putting
drop.
life into perspective. Yeah, it's good to put life into perspective sometimes because I think
Yeah.
people get so caught up in their day to day and they're like trying to execute on every task that they possibly can, especially if they're a driven individual that wants to execute and manifest something into reality. But you realize that time is short, right? We're only on this earth for a short period of time, so try not to take yourself too seriously. Show appreciation to those that are around you, that love you, that care about you, and always understand that at the end of the day, there's always tomorrow. So like if today, for whatever reason, has not been a good day and we've all faced those challenges, there's always tomorrow, and just make sure that you're around those that really care about you. So
Well, absolutely. We're all talking about projects that take years. So what I
yeah,
do today is important, but it's one building block. Like we are not going to solve these world problems today. They will get solved over the course of us showing up every day and keeping our heads on straight. So thank you.
oh, of course. Well, Nicole, we really appreciate your time. I mean, it's been a really insightful conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the feedback that we get from this episode because I'm sure we'll be able to get some great feedback, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch as well. But if people want to learn more about you, maybe even engage in some capacity, whether that's on in the Edge or with Amplify, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best thing is to start at our websites, edgedistrict.com. We are a 501c3, and that will take you to lots of great information, but also a way to contact me. If you prefer to talk more about Amplify Women Tampa Bay, you can go amplifywomen.tampabay.com or just email Nicole at amplifywomen.tampabay.com. I'd love to hear from anyone who is got some great resources or responses to this podcast.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we'll make sure to include that in the show notes. So if you guys will watch us on YouTube, go ahead in the description. Same goes for Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So, well, Nicole, again, I just want to reiterate, we really do appreciate your time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the feedback that we achieved from this particular episode. For those of you guys who are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact on our ability to reach a broader audience, and we obviously greatly appreciate the support. If you guys like this podcast and you're listening to this in a podcast format like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please, please, please leave a 5-star review. The more 5-star reviews we achieve, the more people will ultimately find the podcast and get inspired to take on their first real estate development project. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.